Robert Mills adjusted his glasses and leaned back in his office chair at a Texas college. Outside, students were hurrying to class, their voices merging into a familiar hum. A stack of notebooks with programming lab assignments lay on his desk, but Robert was staring at the screen of his laptop, where the code he had been writing for himself, just to distract himself, glowed. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He thought about how everything in his life was structured like a program, clear, logical, without glitches. "Hey, Rob, are you still here?" Linda, his colleague from the computer science department, appeared in the doorway, holding a mug of coffee. "It's already noon, and it's like you've been sleeping in this office." Robert smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "I'm just checking the work. The students are writing cycles again, as if it were the 90s. Linda laughed, leaning against the doorframe. "You're too hard on them. Give the boys a chance. Not everyone is a genius like you were at their age." "I wasn't a genius," Robert shook his head, closing his laptop. "I just did everything by the rules." "Well, it's in your blood," Linda shrugged. "You're like your father, aren't you? A mechanic, everything according to the drawings, everything according to the instructions." Robert nodded but said nothing. His father, John Mills, really did live by the blueprints. He could take apart and put back together every part of an old pickup truck with his eyes closed. His mother, Helen, was the same way, a schoolteacher who taught lessons according to a strict plan. They taught Robert that life was about order. Do what you have to do, provide for your family, and everything will be fine. He stood up, collected his papers, and headed for the exit. "I'm going home, Linda. Claire is probably already waiting. Say hello to her," Linda waved her mug, "and tell her I'm looking forward to her new exhibition." Robert nodded and walked out into the hallway, which smelled of freshly brewed coffee and the dust of old textbooks. He liked this routine, the lectures, the students, the code. It was all predictable, like home, where Claire, his wife, always had dinner ready by 7, and their son Andrew, now a college student, sometimes called to tell them how he was doing. On the way home, Robert stopped at the supermarket. He pushed the cart down the aisles, choosing from the list Claire had sent him that morning. Milk, eggs, chicken, fresh basil she liked to cook with herbs. He paused at the wine aisle, lost in thought. "Red or white?" he muttered, looking at the bottles. "Have a red, Rob," said a voice behind them. It was Justin, a neighbor who often dropped by for barbecues. "Claire likes Pinot Noir, doesn't she?" Robert turned around, smiling. "You're right. She always says that white is for tourists." Justin laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "How are you, old man? Still programming the world?" "I try," Robert shrugged, putting a bottle of Pinot Noir in the cart. "What about you?" "Well, veterinary medicine doesn't let you get bored. Today we had to pull a cat out of the basement. The owners thought he had escaped, but he was just stuck behind the pipes." "A hero," Robert chuckled. "Yeah," Justin winked. "Tell Claire I'll stop by sometime. She promised to show me her new sketches." "Of course," Robert nodded, feeling a slight warmth at the thought of Claire. Her art had always attracted people. She was like a spark, bright, unpredictable, unlike his measured life. The house smelled of paint and coffee. Claire stood at her easel in the living room, wearing an old t-shirt stained with acrylic. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she was humming as she moved her brush across the canvas. "Rob, you're early." She turned around, smiling. "I thought you'd be sitting around with those codes of yours again." "I decided to take a break." He put the bags on the kitchen table. "I bought your favorite wine." "Pinot?" Her eyes lit up. "You know how to bribe an artist." Robert came closer, looking at the canvas. It was full of bright brushstrokes, abstract lines, intertwining in a chaotic dance. He never understood her paintings, but he always felt her passion in them. "Is this for the exhibition?" he asked, pointing to the canvas. "Maybe," Claire shrugged, wiping her brush on a rag. "I haven't decided yet. Sometimes I feel like I'm just throwing myself out on the canvas, and that's it." "That's art, isn't it?" Robert smiled, but there was a slight awkwardness in his voice. He loved Claire, but her world spontaneous, emotional sometimes seemed alien to him. Right, she winked and headed for her bags. Let's make dinner. I want something with basil. They cooked together as they had done for years. Robert chopped vegetables, Claire roasted chicken, humming an old Fleetwood Mac song. Do you remember how we met? She suddenly asked, stirring the sauce. Robert nodded, not looking up from the tomatoes. At a party in the dorm. You danced like no one was watching. And you were standing in the corner with a beer, looking at me like I was a bug in the code. Claire laughed. I thought you were a nerd who never relaxed. And I thought you were crazy, Robert smiled, looking at her. But beautiful. Claire nudged him with her elbow, still laughing. And yet you married this crazy woman. Best decision of my life, he said quietly, and it was true. Claire Andrew, their home in Austin, all of it was his foundation. After dinner, they sat on the couch with glasses of wine. Claire scrolled through her phone, showing him memes Andrew had sent. He's making jokes about my paintings again, she rolled her eyes, but smiled. He says I paint as if my neural network is broken. Robert laughed. He's just bored. When will he come? For the summer, I guess, Claire shrugged. He's busy with college. Courses, friends, parties. You know how it is. I know, Robert nodded, remembering his student years. He was just like Andrew then, absorbed in his studies, but with a dream of something bigger. Silicon Valley, startups, Google. He had walked this path to build the life his parents dreamed of. Rob, Claire suddenly looked at him seriously. Are you happy? He froze, holding his glass. The question caught him off guard. Of course. I have you, Andrew, work. Everything I need. She nodded, but there was something in her eyes that he didn't understand. Okay, she said quietly and turned back to the phone. Robert finished his wine, feeling slightly uneasy. He dismissed it as a minor bug in the code. Everything was fine. His life was running like a well-oiled program. He stood up to clear away the glasses and glanced at Claire. She was sitting with her legs tucked under her, looking at her phone, but her fingers were frozen on the screen. Robert shook his head and went into the kitchen. Robert Mills stepped out of his car, parked outside his house, and breathed in the warm March air. The evening was mild, with the scent of magnolia blossoms wafting from the garden next door. He adjusted the strap of his laptop bag and checked his watch. It was 6:15 p.m. early. He usually stayed at the college until 7, grading students' papers, but today he had decided to surprise Claire. Maybe they could have dinner on the veranda, discuss their vacation. Andrew was rarely home anymore, busy with college, and Robert missed their family evenings. He walked up the steps, opened the door, and froze. Laughter came from the kitchen, light and warm, not his. A man's voice, soft and casual, mingled with Claire's. Robert put his bag down, slowly closed the door, and stepped toward the kitchen. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to move calmly. Maybe it was Justin, coming to get something, or one of her artist friends. Claire, he called, stepping into the kitchen. She was standing at the table, holding a glass of wine. Her hair was down, and her smile was the same one he had seen when they first met. Opposite her, leaning on the counter, was Justin, their veterinarian neighbor. His denim shirt was rolled up to his elbows, and he was holding a plate of olives in his hand, as if they had just finished a snack. Rob, Claire put her glass down, her smile faltering slightly. You're early. Justin straightened up and nodded with a slight smile. Hi, Rob. Decided to drop in. Claire was showing off her new sketches. Robert looked at the table. No sketches, just a bottle of wine, 2 glasses, and a plate of olives. He looked at Claire. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, but she held herself confidently. Yeah, I was telling Justin about the exhibit, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. He was passing by, and I suggested we come in. I was passing by, Robert repeated, setting his bag down on a chair. His voice was even, but his fingers were clenched into a fist in his pocket. I see. Justin coughed and pushed his plate away. Okay, I have to go. Thanks for the wine, Claire. Rob, See you at the barbecue? Of course, Robert answered without looking at him. Justin walked out, and the front door clicked quietly behind him. Robert stood looking at Claire. She picked up her glass and took a sip as if nothing had happened. Want some wine? She asked, pointing to the bottle. This is the same Pinot you bought last week. No, Robert sat down at the table, looking at his empty plate. What was that, Claire? She sighed, put down her glass, and sat down opposite. It's okay, Rob. Justin came by, we were chatting. He's into art, you know. He was interested in your sketches, but they're not on the table. Robert looked into her eyes. And you laughed, like you haven't laughed with me in a long time. Claire looked away, her fingers fiddling nervously with the edge of her napkin. You're exaggerating. He's just a neighbor. We're friends. Friends, Robert nodded, but a heavy feeling grew in his chest. Okay, let's have dinner. He stood up to get the plates, but Claire stopped him, placing her hand on his wrist. Rob, wait, we need to talk. He froze, feeling the air in the kitchen grow thicker. About what? Claire took a deep breath, her eyes shining, but her voice remaining calm. I don't want to lie. Justin, I like him, not the way you think, but I feel at ease with him. We just talk, we laugh. With you, it's different. Robert felt the floor slipping from under his feet. He had expected anything, an argument, justifications, even a quarrel. But not this. Differently, he repeated quietly. And how should I understand that? Claire stood up, walked around the table, and stopped next to him. You're great, Rob. You're reliable, caring. But our life, it's like your code. Everything is on schedule, according to the rules. I'm tired of this. I want to feel alive. He looked at her, trying to find the words. His brain, accustomed to putting everything into order, refused to process her words. Are you saying I'm boring? He asked, his voice shaking. No, Claire shook her head. Not boring. It's just, I need more. I don't know how to explain it. Try it. His tone grew harsher. Because I just caught my wife with another man in our kitchen. Claire flinched but didn't back down. It's not what you think. We didn't. Nothing happened. But I don't want to pretend that everything is perfect. Maybe we should try something new. An open relationship, for example. Robert laughed, briefly and bitterly. An open relationship? Claire, are you serious? Do you think I'd agree to you running to the neighbors while I sit at home? It's not about Justin, she raised her voice, but then stopped. It's about me, about what I'm missing. And me? Robert stood up, his hands shaking. Have you thought about what I lack? I work, I provide for us, I try to make sure everything is right. And what do I get? You and the vet in our kitchen. Claire was silent, looking at the floor. Then she said quietly, I don't want to fight, Rob. I just want to be honest. Honest, he shook his head, feeling the anger give way to emptiness. Okay, be honest. But I will be too. He picked up his bag and walked out of the kitchen. Claire didn't stop him. Robert walked up to his office, closed the door, and sat down at his desk. The old laptop was still there, as always. He turned it on, and the screen lit up with a familiar interface. Code. That's what he understood. That's where there were no surprises. He opened a project he'd been working on in his spare time, an app for students to track deadlines. His fingers flew across the keyboard, but his thoughts were jumbled. Claire's laugh, her words, Justin's look, they all swirled around in his head like a bug in a program he couldn't debug. The phone vibrated. A message from Andrew. Dad, are you home? Mom wrote that you talk it out. Is everything okay? Robert stared at the screen. Andrew knew and hadn't told him. He gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white, but he answered, Yes, at home. Everything is fine. He put the phone down and returned to the code. The lines on the screen were clear, logical. If he entered the right commands, the program would work. But life didn't seem to obey such rules. Robert leaned back in his chair, looking at the ceiling. It was dark outside, and the sounds of the street had faded. He heard Claire washing the dishes downstairs, quietly, methodically, as if nothing had changed. Robert sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cold mug of coffee. He had spent the night awake, tossing and turning, staring at the dark ceiling while Claire slept next to him as if nothing had changed. Her words about freedom and open relationships played in his head like a loop. He had gotten up before dawn, gone downstairs, and was now looking at the empty kitchen where he had found her with Justin the day before. The glasses were still in the sink, which irritated him more than he had expected. The door creaked and Claire walked in, tying the belt of her robe. She looked tired, but her movements were confident. "You weren't asleep," she said, looking at his mug. "The coffee is cold. Should I make some more?" "No need." Robert pushed his mug away. "I'm not here for the coffee." Claire nodded as if she had expected this. She sat down opposite him, folding her hands on the table. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's talk." Robert looked at her. Her eyes were calm, but there was determination in them. He waited for her to apologize, but instead she spoke. "I've been thinking all night about how to explain this to you. You deserve the truth, Rob. I'm tired of pretending that everything is perfect between us." "Perfect," Robert leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "I never said we were perfect, but I thought we were doing okay, together." Claire looked away, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "We cope, yes. You do everything right. Work, home, bills. You're like a perfect machine. But I'm not a machine, Rob. I need more than just stability." He felt irritation boiling in his chest. "More? What does that mean? Yesterday you were talking about Justin, about freedom. What today? Do you want to leave?" "No," Claire shook her head, her voice quieter. "I don't want to leave. I love you. But I want to feel alive. I want to laugh, to improvise, to not have to follow your schedule." Robert squeezed his mug so hard his fingers turned white. "And Justin helps with that?" he asked, trying not to break down. "Because yesterday you seemed very alive." Claire flinched but didn't look away. "Justin is not the point. He is just a person with whom I can be myself. Not a wife, not a mother, just Claire." "Just Claire," Robert repeated, his voice shaking. "And who am I to you? A husband who gets in the way of being just Claire?" "You're not in the way." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Rob, I don't want to lose you. That's why I suggested an open relationship, so we could both be honest." Robert stood up, pushing his chair back. He walked over to the window, looking out at the neighbor's yard. Justin's truck was gone, and that was a strange relief. "Honest," he said without turning around. "Do you think I can live with knowing that you're with someone else? Is this okay for me?" Claire was silent, then quietly replied, "I don't know if you can, but I know I can't go on like this. I'm suffocating, Rob." He turned, his eyes narrowing. "Are you suffocating? I work so we can have this house, so Andrew can go to college, so you can have your studio, and you're suffocating. It's not about money." Claire stood up too, her voice growing louder. "It's about feelings, about not feeling wanted. You come home, and we're like neighbors. We cook dinner, watch TV, and go to bed. Where am I? Where are we?" Robert felt the words hit him like errors in code he couldn't fix. He wanted to argue, but there was truth in her words he hadn't noticed. "I'm trying, Claire," he said finally. "I thought that was enough." "It's not about trying." Her voice softened, but there was pain in it. "I know you do everything for us, but I want you to see me. Not my wife, not Andrew's mother, but me." Robert looked at her, and there was no answer in his head. He had always seen her bright, talented, unpredictable. But maybe he only saw what he wanted to see. "So what now?" he asked. "You're going to date Justin, other people, and I'm supposed to just agree?" Claire came closer, her eyes shining. "I don't know what will happen, Rob, but I don't want to lie. If we try an open relationship, maybe we can find a way to be together. In a new way." He shook his head, feeling an emptiness fill his chest. "This is not my way, Claire. I don't know how to live like this. She nodded as if she had expected it. Then tell me how you want to live. Robert opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. He wanted to say that he wanted her, their family, their life. But after yesterday, it all seemed as fragile as glass. I need to go to work, he said finally, taking the keys from the table. Rob, Claire stepped toward him. Please don't leave like that. I'm not leaving, he looked into her eyes. I just don't know what to say. He walked out of the kitchen, feeling her eyes on his back. In the car, he started the engine but didn't move. Instead, he took out his phone and opened a family chat. Andrew wrote nothing new. Robert typed, Andrew, did you know that Mom wants an open relationship? He sent the message and immediately regretted it. But there was no response, so he put the phone away. The drive to college was silent. He parked, walked into the building, and headed to his office. Linda met him in the hallway, holding a stack of papers. Rob, you're late, she smiled, but then frowned. Are you okay? You look like your car's been stolen. It's okay, Robert forced himself to smile. I just didn't get enough sleep. Well, here you go, she handed him the folder. These are students' works. Robert took the folder, nodded, and closed the office door behind him. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, but instead of code, he stared at a blank screen. Yesterday, he thought his life was a well-oiled system. Today, he realized that the system had failed. Robert sat in his office at college, staring at his laptop screen. The code he'd written to demonstrate in class was open, but the cursor blinked and didn't move. His mind was far from programming. The conversation with Claire that morning, her quiet admission that she was suffocating in their marriage, still echoed in his head. He tried to focus, but Claire's words, her suggestion of an open relationship, struck him like an error he couldn't find in thousands of lines of code. Robert's phone vibrated, and he grabbed it, hoping for a message from Andrew. He had texted his son that morning, asking if he knew about Claire's plans, but there had been no response. Now the screen lit up with a notification from their family chat. Andrew had written, Dad, I know. Mom told me a couple of days ago. I understand her. Don't be so old, it's normal now. The main thing is honesty. Robert stared at the words, his blood pounding in his temples. His son Andrew, the one he had taught to ride a bike, the one they had built the first computer with, was supporting Claire. He reread the message, hoping he had misunderstood, but the words were clear. Robert put the phone down, his fingers shaking. He had expected Andrew to be on his side, to be as outraged as he was. But instead, there was a knock at the door. Linda, his colleague, looked into the office, holding a folder in her hands. Rob, are you ready for the lecture? She looked at him, narrowing her eyes. You look like you got run over by a truck. Robert forced himself to smile, even though his chest was clenching. I just didn't get enough sleep, Linda. Everything's fine. Are you sure? She stepped inside, closing the door. You've been different for the second day already. Something at home? Robert shook his head, not wanting to go into details. Just family matters. Nothing serious. Linda nodded, but her gaze was attentive. Okay, but if you want to talk, I'm in the next room. And don't forget, you have students in 20 minutes. Thank you, Robert nodded, opening his laptop to finish the slides. When Linda left, he picked up his phone again. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to text Andrew to ask how he could so easily side with his mother, but instead he simply wrote, Call me when you have time. He sent the message and leaned back in his chair. The lecture was still ahead, but he couldn't think about loops and algorithms. His family, his foundation, was crumbling, and now even Andrew, his boy, seemed a stranger. The lecture went by automatically. Robert explained the basics of array sorting to the students, answered questions, but his mind was elsewhere. After class, he returned to his office, closed the door, and took out his phone. Andrew didn't answer. Robert threw the phone on the table and opened a drawer where an old laptop lay, the same one he had used back in Silicon Valley. He turned it on, and the screen lit up with a familiar interface. Code. This was where everything made sense. No open relationships, no betrayals, just logic. He started writing, just to keep his hands busy. It was an old project, a task planning app he'd once wanted to turn into a startup. Lines of code appeared on the screen, but his thoughts kept returning to Andrew. Why had he supported Claire? Why hadn't he called to ask how his father was? Robert paused, staring at the screen. His fingers froze, and he closed the laptop. He drove home that evening, gripping the steering wheel harder than he should have. The radio was off, the music was just annoying. He wondered what Claire would say if she started talking about freedom again. But what haunted him most was Andrew's message. Don't be so old. It's okay. How could it be okay? When he walked into the house, Claire was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a sketchbook. She looked up, but she didn't smile. "You're late," she said, closing the album. "I thought you were stuck at college again." "I was late with a lecture." Robert put his bag on the floor and sat down in the chair opposite. Andrew wrote. Claire froze, her fingers tightening around her pencil. "What did he say?" Robert took out his phone, opened the chat, and handed it to her. She read the message, and her face softened. "He just wants us to be honest with each other," she said quietly. "Honest?" Robert leaned forward, his voice sharp. "He says I'm old-fashioned because I don't want my wife sleeping with the neighbor. Is that honesty now?" Claire sighed, putting the album aside. "Rob, that's not what he meant. He sees that I'm unhappy, and he wants us to find a way out." "Unhappy?" Robert stood up, feeling anger rise in his chest. "And me, Claire? Have you thought about how I feel when my son tells me it's okay for you to be with someone else?" "He doesn't say it's okay for you." Claire stood up too, her voice growing louder. "He says he understands me because I talked to him. What about you? When was the last time you really talked to him?" Robert froze. She was right, he hadn't called Andrew in weeks, only texted him briefly. But that didn't justify his words. "I thought he was on my side," Robert said, his voice breaking. "I thought he was my son." "He's your son too." Claire stepped closer. "But he's an adult. He sees things his own way." "In your opinion," Robert corrected. "He sees it your way." Claire was silent, looking at him. Her eyes were shining, but she was not crying. "I didn't mean for it to turn out this way," she said finally. "I just wanted to be honest." "Honest?" Robert shook his head. "You told our son you wanted an open relationship before you talked to me. Is that honesty?" Claire opened her mouth, but found no words. Robert picked up his bag and headed for the stairs. "I'll be in the office," he said without turning around. "Rob," Claire stepped after him. "Don't close yourself off. Please, let's talk." "Enough talk." He stopped but did not turn around. "I've heard enough." He walked up to his office, closed the door, and sat down at his desk. The old laptop was still there, the screen glowing. Robert opened it, but instead of typing, he was staring at a blank desktop. His fingers were on the keyboard, but he wasn't typing. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened Andrew's message again. "Dad, I know. Mom told me a couple of days ago. I understand her. Don't be so old. It's normal now. The main thing is honesty." He wanted to write something harsh, something accusatory, but instead he just closed the chat. He felt betrayed not just by Claire, but by Andrew too. His son, his pride, had chosen his mother's side. Robert leaned back in his chair, looking out the window. It was dark outside, except for the streetlight outside Justin's house, casting a yellow glow onto the sidewalk. He picked up the phone and dialed Andrew's number. Long beeps. No one answered. Robert put the phone down on the table and closed his eyes. The silence in the office was deafening. Robert parked his car outside the office of Morgan Drake, his lawyer, in downtown Austin. The morning sun glinted off the glass storefronts, and the city hummed with its usual activities: cars, pedestrians, coffee shops. But inside Robert, everything was quiet, as if someone had turned off the volume. After Andrew's supportive text yesterday, and their conversation that had only deepened his sense of betrayal, He couldn't stay home. He didn't sleep, he didn't eat, he just sat in his office, staring at his old laptop until the light began to break outside. He needed a plan, something to take back control. He walked into Morgan's office, a small room with wooden furniture and the smell of old books. The secretary, a young woman with short hair, smiled at him. "Mr. Mills, Morgan is waiting for you. Come in." Robert nodded, adjusted the strap of his bag, and walked toward the office. Morgan, a man in his 60s with thick gray hair, sat at his desk, looking over papers. His wire-rimmed glasses had slipped down to the tip of his nose. "Rob," Morgan stood up, holding out his hand. "How old man? What brings you here?" Robert shook her hand, but failed to smile. He sat down opposite her, placing his bag on his lap. "I need your help, Morgan. Family matters." Morgan squinted, taking off his glasses. "Family? Is Claire okay? Andrew?" "Andrew's in college." Robert paused, choosing his words. "And Claire, she wants an open relationship." Morgan leaned back in his chair, wiping his glasses with a handkerchief. "Open relationships? Shit, Rob, is that a thing now?" "It seems so." Robert clenched his fists, looking at the table. "She says she's suffocating, that she needs freedom, and Andrew, he supports her." Morgan raised his eyebrows but remained silent, allowing Robert to continue. "I found her with her neighbor, Justin, the vet. They were drinking wine, laughing. She says nothing happened, but—" Robert trailed off, feeling his throat tighten. "I don't know what to do." Morgan nodded, placing his glasses on the table. "Okay, let's figure it out. Do you want a divorce?" Robert shook his head. "No, I don't want to destroy the family, but I want them to understand that their choice has a price." "The price," Morgan repeated, tapping his pen on the table. "What do you mean?" Robert took a deep breath. He had been thinking about this all night, and now the words came out clear as code. "I want an agreement. If Claire wants this freedom, she loses the rights to the house. I bought it before the marriage. No joint accounts, no insurance of mine. If she starts another relationship, she will not be able to lay claim to my property." Morgan hissed, leaning back. "That's tough, Rob. Are you sure? That could complicate things." "I'm sure." Robert looked him in the eye. "I don't want war, but I won't sit back and watch it rewrite the rules, and I'm paying for it." Morgan nodded, opening his laptop. "Okay, I can draw up an agreement. It will be legally clean, but you need to be prepared for her reaction, and Andrew's reaction." "Andrew," Robert winced, remembering his son's message. "He's already chosen her side." "He's young," Morgan shrugged. "Young people think they know everything. Give him time." Robert remained silent. Time. He wasn't sure time would fix anything. "How much do you need for the documents?" he asked. "A couple of days," Morgan made a note. "I'll send you a draft, you can look at it. But Rob, one question, are you sure you want this? This isn't just paper. It's a line you draw." Robert nodded, his face firm. "I want everything to be clear. For everyone." Morgan sighed, but nodded. "Okay, I'll take care of it." Robert left the office, feeling strangely relieved. He had taken a step, however small, toward regaining control. In the car, he checked his phone, no messages, no calls from Andrew. He had wanted to call his son, but he had driven home instead. He needed to see Claire to tell her of his decision. The house was quiet. Claire was in her studio, the door ajar. Robert knocked, but did not wait for an answer and entered. She was standing at the easel, but the brush was lying on the table, and the canvas was empty. "Rob," she turned around, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. "Aren't you at work?" "I took a day off." He stopped at the door, holding his bag. "We need to talk." Claire nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I know. I was thinking about yesterday. I didn't want you to feel betrayed. But I feel it." Robert stepped closer. "And not just because of you. Andrew wrote. He knew. He supports you." Claire looked away, her fingers nervously fiddling with the edge of her apron. "I spoke to him a couple of days ago. I didn't want to hide it. You told him, but not me. His voice was cold. And now he says I'm old-fashioned, that it's normal. He didn't mean to hurt you. Claire looked at him. He just sees that I'm unhappy. Robert clenched his jaw. And me? Have you thought about how I feel? I don't want an open relationship, Claire. I don't want to share you with anyone. But if that's what you've decided, there will be a price. Claire frowned. Price? What do you mean? Robert took a notebook out of his bag and wrote down the main points for Morgan. I've been to a lawyer. If you want this freedom, I agree. But you lose the rights to the house, it's mine, bought before the marriage. No joint accounts, no insurance. If you start a new relationship, you can't lay claim to my property. Claire froze, her eyes widening. Are you serious? You want to? What, punish me? Not to punish. Robert shook his head. I want everything to be fair. You mean fair? Here's mine. She was silent, looking at him. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, if you need it, I'll sign it. Robert expected an argument, shouting, tears. But her agreement hit harder. He nodded, putting away his notebook. Morgan will send the papers in a couple of days. Claire turned back to the easel, but did not pick up her brush. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way, Rob. Me too, he said quietly and left the studio. Robert stood at the window of his college office, looking out onto the parking lot where students were crowded around their cars. The rain that had started yesterday had stopped, leaving puddles and damp air. It had been a week since Claire had signed the agreement Morgan had drawn up. She hadn't argued, she hadn't cried, she had simply signed and gone to her studio. Robert had expected relief, but instead he felt the emptiness in his chest deepen. He had regained control, but it hadn't fixed the rift in his life. The phone was lying on the table, the screen dark. Andrew hadn't responded to his last message, and Robert didn't text again. He didn't know what to say to his son, who had chosen his mother's side. Instead, he opened his laptop and began checking students' work, but his thoughts were jumbled. Code, usually his refuge, now seemed like just a string of lines. There was a knock at the door. Linda, his colleague, walked in with a mug of coffee and a smile. Rob, you're sitting in the dark again like a hacker from the movies. She put the mug on the table. I brought you coffee. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Robert forced a smile as he accepted the mug. Thank you, Linda. There's just a lot of work. Yeah, right, she squinted, sitting on the edge of the table. You've been walking around like a zombie for 2 weeks now. Something up at home. Is Claire still getting ready for her exhibition? Robert nodded, avoiding her gaze. Yes, she's busy. Everything's fine. Linda looked at him doubtfully, but did not insist. Okay, but if anything happens, you know where to find me. And don't forget, tomorrow is the deadline for reports for the department. I remember, Robert nodded, sipping his coffee. After Linda left, he opened his email and saw an email from the organizer of a hackathon in Dallas. He'd signed up for it a couple of months ago, thinking it would be a nice distraction to get back to coding for fun rather than work. Now it seemed like a salvation. He responded, confirming his participation, and closed his laptop. Dallas was 3 hours away. Maybe he could turn off his thoughts about Claire and Andrew there. At home, he found Claire in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a salad, her movements quick, almost mechanical. You're late, she said, without looking up. I thought you'd be staying late at college again. I'm going to a hackathon in Dallas tomorrow. Robert put his bag on a chair. I'll be back in a couple of days. Claire paused, holding the knife over the tomato. Hackathon, you didn't say. I decided today, he shrugged, opening the refrigerator. I need to take my mind off things. She nodded, but her face was tense. Is it because of me? Robert froze, holding the bottle of water. He wanted to say something harsh, but instead he simply replied, It's because of me. I need to clear my head. Claire looked at him, her eyes tired. Okay, if you need it, go. He nodded and went into his office. There he packed a bag for the trip, laptop, charger, a couple of shirts. He didn't want to think about Claire, about what she was doing while he was gone. The agreement was signed, the rules were set. But that didn't take away the pain. He left early the next morning. The drive to Dallas was quiet, the radio playing old rock, but Robert barely listened. He thought about how Claire had changed. Her freedom had begun. He knew Justin had visited them a couple of times a week, though Claire said it was just friendship. He didn't ask for details. He didn't want to know. The hackathon was taking place in a large convention center in downtown Dallas. The room was buzzing with voices, programmers, designers, students, all with laptops and energy drinks. Robert signed up, got a badge, and found his team 3 young guys who looked like they'd just graduated from college. "Are you Robert Mills?" asked one of them, a skinny guy with dreadlocks named Kyle. "I read your blog about algorithm optimization. It's cool that you're here." Robert smiled, feeling a slight warmth for the first time in a week. "Thank you. What kind of project do we have?" "A carbon footprint app," said a girl with short blue hair who introduced herself as Sophie. "We want to make something simple, but with a cool interface." Robert nodded, opening his laptop. "Okay, let's start with architecture." The work was absorbing. The code, the debates over frameworks, the quick pizza bites, it all felt familiar, homely. He felt at home, like he was back in his 20s, writing code all night at Silicon Valley startups. But there was still Claire, her signature on the agreement, Andrew's words, in the back of his mind. That evening, after the first day of the hackathon, he was sitting at the conference center bar with the team. Kyle and Sophie were arguing about which language was best for the back end, and a third member, a quiet guy named Liam, was scrolling through his phone. Robert was drinking a beer, listening to them, when a woman approached the table. "Are you free?" She pointed to the chair next to Robert. "Yes, of course," he nodded, pushing his bag away. She sat down, placing a glass of soda on the table. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and her name tag read, Megan, cybersecurity analyst. "Robert, right?" She smiled, her voice calm but confident. "I saw you on stage, helping the jury set up the server." "Yes, that happened," Robert shrugged. "And what team are you on?" "We're making a vulnerability analysis tool." She sipped her soda. "Nothing revolutionary, but useful. What about you?" "A carbon footprint app." He nodded at his team, still arguing. "Young guys, but they're on fire." Megan laughed. "That's good. Young people always bring fresh ideas. And you, it seems, are a veteran." "You could say that," Robert smiled, but his gaze was serious. "I worked in startups, then at Google. Now I teach." "Impressive." Megan looked at him carefully. "But you don't look like you're here to have fun. Something's bothering you." Robert froze, not expecting such a question. He wanted to brush it off, but her direct gaze stopped him. "Just family stuff," he said finally. "I needed a break." "I understand," Megan nodded, not pressing. "I got divorced 2 years ago. Sometimes you just need to get away and do something else." Robert looked at her. Her voice was calm, undramatic, but there was strength in it. "Does it help?" he asked. "Sometimes," she shrugged. "But problems are still waiting for you when you get back." Robert nodded, taking a sip of his beer. For the first time in a week, he felt like he could speak without hiding the pain. "My wife wants an open relationship," he said quietly, looking at the glass. "And her son supports her." Megan whistled. "Harsh. And what did you decide?" "I drew up an agreement." Robert looked at her. "If she wants freedom, she loses her rights to the house, the bills, the insurance." She signed it. Cold calculation, Megan smiled, but without condemnation. "Respect. But that doesn't solve everything, does it?" "No," Robert shook his head. "It doesn't." They talked for another hour about the hackathon, about code, about life. Megan was direct, without illusions, and that was appealing. When she left, Robert felt a strange warmth. Not romance, but something simpler, a sense of being heard. He returned to the hotel, lay down on the bed, and looked at his phone. A message from Claire. "Justin came by and brought an art book. Is everything okay?" Robert gritted his teeth, but answered, "It's fine. Good luck with the book and Justin." Robert sat at a long table in a noisy hackathon hall in Dallas, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the click of keyboards. His team Kyle, Sophie, and Liam were arguing about how to optimize an algorithm for their carbon tracking app. Robert tweaked the code, but his thoughts kept returning to his conversation with Megan the night before. Her directness, her lack of drama, her calm gaze, it was a breath of fresh air after weeks of the stifling emptiness of his home. He hadn't been looking for anything more than a job, but her words about divorce and living without illusions had struck a chord with him. "Rob, are you with us?" Kyle waved his hand in front of his face. "You've been looking at that line for 10 minutes. Robert blinked, coming back to reality. "Yes, sorry. I think we should add caching for requests. We'll reduce the load on the server." "Brilliant," Sophie nodded, writing down the idea. "But let's finish the interface first. It looks like it's from 2005. Robert grinned as he opened the editor. Working at a hackathon was his comfort zone code, logic, results. There was no Claire with her freedom, no Andrew's message that still stung like an open wound. He coded until the sun began to set, bathing the room in orange light. After another round of debate, the team decided to take a break. Robert walked out onto the convention center terrace, holding a bottle of water. The city noise of Dallas car horns, people walking by, was a background noise that helped drown out his thoughts. He leaned against the railing, looking up at the skyscrapers, when he heard footsteps. Hiding again, Megan appeared next to him, holding a coffee. Her dark hair was down, and her t-shirt read, "Hack the Planet." Robert smiled, feeling lighter for the first time that day. "I'm not hiding, I'm just breathing." "Yeah, right." She leaned against the railing next to him. "You look like someone who's trying to reboot the system." "Maybe so." He took a sip of water, looking at her. "And you? Is your project progressing?" "It's fine," Megan shrugged. "We found a bug in the parser, but we're already fixing it. What about you?" "We're arguing about how to make the interface not look like Windows XP," Robert chuckled. Megan laughed, her laugh light and effortless. "It's already a victory if you at least get to Windows 7. They fell silent, but the silence was comfortable. Robert looked out over the city, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease. Megan didn't ask any unnecessary questions, didn't pry into his soul, and that was exactly what he needed right now. "You were talking about your wife yesterday," she said finally, looking at her coffee. "Want to tell me more?" Robert paused. He wasn't used to sharing personal information, especially with strangers. But there was something about Megan that made him talk. "She wants an open relationship," he said, looking at the bottle in his hands. "She says she's suffocating in our marriage. And our son, he supports her." Megan nodded without interrupting. "And you signed an agreement with her. A tough move." "Yes," Robert looked at her. "I thought it would give me control, but now I'm not sure it made a difference." "Control is a deceptive thing." Megan sipped her coffee. "When I was getting divorced, I tried to control everything too. Documents, meeting schedules, even how my ex and I would talk about the kids. But in the end, I realized that life is not a code where you can write the perfect function." Robert looked at her more closely. Her voice was even, but there was a sense of experience in it, as if she had already been through what he was just beginning to experience. "Do you have children?" he asked. "No," she shook her head. "We haven't gotten to that point. And frankly, I'm glad. The divorce was hell enough." "I see," Robert nodded, feeling strangely relieved by her words. "My son, Andrew, he wrote that I was old-fashioned, that I should be for honesty." Megan chuckled. "Young people, they think they know everything. My little brother is the same, always teaching me how to live." Robert smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I thought he would be on my side." "Give him time." Megan looked at him. "He's an adult, but he's still a son. He's trying to figure out what to do between you two." Robert nodded, but Andrew's words still stung. He pulled out his phone and checked no messages, no calls. He put the phone away and turned to Megan. "How did you cope after the divorce?" "Work," she shrugged. "Cybersecurity is like a puzzle. There is always something to solve. And also traveling. I go to these hackathons so I don't sit still. Sounds like a plan. Robert took a sip of water. Maybe I should get away more often too. Try it, Megan smiled. But don't hide from your problems. They'll find you anyway. They talked for another hour, jumping from the hackathon to work to life. Megan talked about her career, how she'd moved from programming to cybersecurity after her company's database was hacked. Robert shared stories from Silicon Valley about late nights spent coding and how he'd left Google to teach. The conversation was light, no pressure, and Robert found himself, for the first time in a long time, not thinking about Claire every second. When the hackathon resumed, they returned to their teams. Robert was working with renewed vigor, tweaking the code and helping Sophie with the design. By the evening, their app was starting to take shape, and the team was in high spirits. "Rob, you're a genius," Kyle clapped him on the shoulder. "Without you, we'd still be arguing about the color of the buttons." "Just do your job," Robert smiled, closing his laptop. After the day was over, he met Megan again at the convention center bar. She was sitting with her laptop, frowning at the screen. "Problems?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "There's a bug in the code," she sighed, pushing the laptop away. "I guess I'm tired. I need a beer." "I can bring it." Robert stood up. "Which one?" "Something light," she smiled. "And thank you." He returned with 2 bottles, and they began talking again. Megan told him about her latest project, protecting data for a small company, and Robert shared a story about how he once wrote code for a startup overnight to save a deadline. "You still like coding, right?" Megan asked, looking at him. "Yes," he nodded. "It's the only thing that always makes sense." "Not always," she chuckled. "Sometimes the code breaks like everything else." Robert looked at her, and there was something in her eyes that made him feel alive. Not as a husband, not as a father, but simply as Robert. "You may be right," he said quietly. "But as long as it works, I know what to do." Robert returned from Dallas feeling like the world around him had become a little lighter. The hackathon had given him a break code, new faces, conversations with Megan that didn't require him to be anyone but himself. He parked his car outside the Austin house, looking at the familiar facade. It was the height of summer, oppressive heat, but the yard looked well kept. Claire had probably been watering the lawn. He pulled out his laptop bag and walked into the house, expecting silence. Instead, voices drifted in from the living room. "Dad?" Andrew stood by the couch, holding his backpack. His dark hair was longer than Robert remembered, and his eyes were a mixture of surprise and tension. "Andrew," Robert put his bag down, feeling his heart sink. "Are you here?" "Yeah, for a couple of weeks," Andrew shrugged, but didn't smile. "Didn't Mom tell you?" Claire walked out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "I wanted to surprise you," she said, looking at Robert. "You're back early." "The hackathon is over," Robert nodded, trying to keep his voice even. "It's good to see you, Andrew." Andrew just nodded, shifting his backpack to his other shoulder. "Me too. I'll go unpack." He went upstairs and Robert looked at Claire. Her face was calm, but there was something in her eyes that he couldn't read. "You didn't warn me," he said, taking off his sneakers. "He decided to come yesterday," Claire shrugged. "I thought you'd appreciate it." "Nice too," Robert repeated, but there was no warmth in his voice. He went into the kitchen, poured himself some water, and drank it down in one gulp. Andrew was home, but after his message, "Don't be so old," Robert didn't know how to talk to him. That evening, they sat down to dinner. Claire had made pasta with pesto sauce, her favorite dish. Andrew ate in silence, scrolling through his phone. Robert looked at him, trying to find in his face the boy with whom they had fixed bicycles. "How was college?" Robert asked, pushing his plate away. "It's fine." Andrew didn't look up. "Courses, projects, nothing special." "What projects?" Robert tried to keep the conversation going. "Something about programming." "Yeah, a campus app," Andrew shrugged. "Like a social network for students." "Sounds cool," Robert nodded. "If you need help with the code, I can take a look." Andrew finally looked up, but it wasn't gratitude that was in his eyes, it was irritation. I can handle it, Dad. Claire coughed, placing her glass on the table. Andrew, your father just wants to help. I know, Andrew leaned back in his chair, but I'm not a child. Robert gripped his fork, but forced himself to smile. No one is saying you're a child. I'm just curious what you're up to. Andrew said nothing, looking back at his phone. Robert looked at Claire, but she looked away as if she didn't want to interfere. After dinner, Andrew went to his room, and Robert helped Claire clear the table. He's just tired from the journey, she said, loading the dishwasher. Or he's angry, Robert turned off the tap. Because of me. Claire sighed but didn't answer. Robert went into his office, feeling the tension return. He opened his laptop and checked his email. Megan had sent a message. How did you get there? The hackathon was awesome. I need to do it again. Robert smiled as he typed his reply. Got there okay. Yeah, the hackathon was awesome. Keep me posted if you're in Austin. He sent the message and sat back. Megan was a breath of fresh air, straightforward, no drama. But things were different at home. Andrew, Claire, the agreement, it all weighed on him like a bug in the code he couldn't find. The next day, Robert returned home early from work, hoping to talk to Andrew. He found his son in the living room, watching a TV show on his laptop. Hey, Robert sat down on the couch next to me. Got a minute? Andrew took off his headphones, but his gaze was wary. What? Robert took a deep breath. He had been rehearsing this conversation all day, but now the words felt wrong. I know you talked to Mom about her. Ideas. About open relationships. I want to hear what you think. Andrew frowned, closing his laptop. I think that Mom has the right to be happy. Robert felt the blood rush to his face. And me? I don't have the right. You live like you're in an office, Dad. Andrew raised his voice. Everything is on schedule. Everything is by the rules. Mom wants to live, not be your secretary. Secretary, Robert stood up, his voice hardening. I work so we can have this house, so you can go to college. It's not a schedule, it's a responsibility. Andrew stood up too, his eyes sparkling. Maybe she doesn't need your responsibility. Maybe she needs someone who sees her. Robert froze, his son's words cutting like a knife. He wanted to shout, to explain, but instead he said, Have you seen me, Andrew? Have you seen how I feel when my wife drinks wine with the neighbor and my son says it's okay? Andrew opened his mouth, but fell silent. Then he said quietly, I'm not saying it's normal for you. I'm saying I understand her. You understand her, Robert nodded, feeling his anger give way to emptiness. And do you understand me? Andrew looked away, clenching his fists. You're not letting her breathe, Dad, and I don't think you want to change anything at all. Robert looked at his son, trying to find in him the boy who had run after him with a screwdriver, helping him fix the computer. But in front of him stood an adult, a stranger, with a firm gaze. I don't want to change anything, Robert said quietly, but I don't want to be broken. Andrew was silent. Then he picked up his laptop and went upstairs. Robert stayed in the living room, feeling the silence weighing on him. He took out his phone, opened the message from Megan. He wanted to write, but instead he put the phone away. He wasn't ready to talk to her. Not now. That evening, Claire returned from the studio with her hands covered in paint. I saw you talking to Andrew, she said, sitting down at the table. How did you pass? Bad. Robert poured himself some water. He thinks I choked you. Claire sighed, drying her hands with a towel. He just wants us both to be happy. He wants you to be happy, Robert corrected. He doesn't even listen to me. Claire looked at him, her eyes tired. Give him time, Rob. He loves you. It doesn't look like it. Robert stood up, heading towards the office. I'll be working. Robert sat at the kitchen table, staring at his empty coffee mug. The morning was quiet, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. A month had passed since his fight with Andrew, and his son had stopped texting. The message, "You're worse than I thought," was still there, like a bug in his code he couldn't fix. Claire, meanwhile, continued her freedom. She met Justin and others, though she didn't go into detail, and Robert didn't ask. The agreement she'd signed sat in his desk drawer, a reminder that he'd set boundaries. But those boundaries brought no peace. He stood up to pour more coffee when the front door creaked. Claire walked in, her steps slow, almost hesitant. She didn't look like her usual self. Her hair was a mess, there were dark circles under her eyes, and her jeans hung off her as if she'd lost weight. She was carrying an art supply bag, but she dropped it by the door without even unpacking it. "Rob," she said, stopping in the kitchen doorway. Her voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't slept. "You're home." "Yes," he put the mug on the table. "I don't have any lectures until lunch. Are you okay?" Claire nodded, but her eyes avoided his. She walked to the sink, poured water, and drank it down in one gulp. Robert watched her, feeling the worry growing in his chest. She had never looked so broken. "We need to talk," she said finally, sitting down opposite him, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. Robert tensed but nodded. "Speak." Claire took a deep breath, looking at her hands. "I was thinking about us, about what I did. I want to fix it, Rob. I want to go back." He froze, her words hitting him like an unexpected bug in his code. He had expected anything another conversation about freedom, excuses, even a fight, but not this. "Go back," he repeated, his voice even but his inside seething. "You signed the agreement, Claire. You chose your freedom. Now what? Have you changed your mind?" Claire looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I was wrong. I thought I needed something else, that I could be happier. But I'm not happy, Rob. I miss us. I miss you." Robert looked at her, trying to find the Claire he knew in her face. The one who danced at the college party, who laughed at his jokes, who drew in their living room. But here was the woman who had drunk wine with Justin a month ago, who had told him she was suffocating in their marriage. "Do you miss us?" he said slowly, "or what was comfortable? The house, the bills, the insurance, everything you agreed to lose?" Claire flinched, but didn't look away. "It's not about the money, Rob. I know you think I used you, but I didn't. I'm confused. Justin, the others, it was a mistake. I want our family." Robert stood up, walking to the window. The neighbor's yard was empty beyond the glass, Justin's truck missing. He clenched his fists, feeling his anger fighting against the emptiness. "You told Andrew before you talked to me," he said without turning around. "You chose freedom, and he supported you. And now you want to go back as if nothing happened?" Claire stood up, her voice shaking. "I know I hurt you, and Andrew too, but I don't want to lose you. I'm ready to fix this. We can go to therapy, start over. Please, Rob." He turned, looking into her eyes. Her face was sincere, but it only increased his pain. "You broke our code, Claire," he said quietly. "You rewrote the rules, and now you want to roll back the changes? That's not how it works." Claire stepped closer, her hands shaking. "I know I can't take it all back, but I want to try. For us. For Andrew." "Andrew," Robert smiled bitterly. "He said I was worse than he thought, because I made you sign the agreement. Do you think he'll want us to be together?" Claire was silent, her eyes filling with tears. "He loves you, Rob. He's just angry. Give him time." "Time," Robert shook his head. "You talk about time, but I don't know who you are now. You're not the Claire I knew." She lowered her head, her shoulders slumped. "I'm still me. I'm just lost. But I want to find my way back." Robert looked at her, memories spinning in his head, their wedding, Andrew's first cry, the nights they cooked dinner together. But alongside those images were others: Justin in their kitchen, Andrew's text, her signature on the agreement. He felt something inside him snap. "I can't, Claire," he said finally. "You wanted freedom. You got it. I live by your rules now." Claire covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Robert wanted to come over and hug her like he had before, but he couldn't. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone. In his office, he sat down at his desk and turned on his old laptop. The screen lit up, but he didn't open the code. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened the message from Megan that had arrived yesterday. "Hey, how are things in Austin? If you're ever in Dallas, let me know." Robert wrote, "Things are complicated at home. Maybe we can meet next week. We need to have a normal conversation." He sent the message and leaned back in his chair. Megan responded a minute later. "Wow, that sounds serious. I'm in Austin next week for a cybersecurity conference. Can we make time?" Robert smiled, feeling a slight warmth. "We'll find it. Thank you." He put the phone away and looked at the laptop screen. The code was waiting for him, but he couldn't focus. Instead, he opened the desk drawer where the agreement was. Claire's signature was as clear as a period at the end of a program. He closed the drawer and stood up. He had to go to college. He was explaining the basics of databases to students in a lecture, but his voice sounded mechanical. After class, Linda caught him in the hallway. "Rob, you're like a zombie again," she frowned, holding the folder. "Did something happen?" "Family matters," he shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Nothing new." "If you need to talk, I'm here." Linda touched his shoulder, seriously. "As thank you," Robert nodded, but went into the office. There, he sat down at the table, opened his laptop, and tried to work. But his thoughts kept returning to Claire, her tears, her words about coming back. He wanted to believe her, but he couldn't. She had changed their lives, and he didn't know how to go back. The phone vibrated, a message from Andrew. "Mom said you don't want to make peace. Are you really that stubborn?" Robert squeezed the phone, but didn't answer. Robert walked across the college campus, clutching a folder of students' work. Fall had arrived in Austin without him noticing, the leaves turning yellow and the air growing cooler. It had been a month since Claire had asked him to come back, and he had refused. Their home had become a place where they coexisted but did not live together. She in her studio, he in his office or at work. Andrew hadn't written since their fight, and his silence was a constant background noise in Robert's head. But Megan's texts, their small talk, were the only relief. He took out his phone, checking her latest message. "Conference is over. Still in Austin until Friday. Coffee tomorrow." Robert smiled as he typed his reply. "Yes, will 10 be okay? The same coffee shop on the 6th? He put the phone away and walked into his office. Linda, his colleague, was already there, leafing through a magazine on his desk. "Rob, you're smiling at the phone again." She narrowed her eyes, smirking. "Who is that, the new student?" "Very funny." Robert shook his head, sitting down at the table. "Just a friend." "A friend?" "Yeah." Linda stood up, adjusting her glasses. "Well, if this friend makes you smile, I'm all for it. You've been a dark cloud lately." Robert said nothing, opening his laptop. Linda left, and he began checking papers, but his thoughts kept returning to Megan. Their meetings after the hackathon in Dallas had become regular coffee, walks, sometimes a beer at a bar with live music. She was direct, without drama, and with her, Robert felt not like a husband, not a father, but just a person. The next day, he arrived at the coffee shop on 6th Street a little earlier. The street was busy. Tourists were taking pictures of graffiti. A street musician was playing guitar. Megan was already sitting at a table by the window, wearing a denim jacket and using her laptop. "You're here early," she smiled, closing the screen. "Is this your coder's punctuality?" "Sorry." Robert sat down opposite, ordering an espresso. "How was the conference?" "Lots of buzzwords, not much action." Megan shrugged, sipping her coffee. "But I found a few contacts to work with." "What about you? Are students still coding at a 90s level?" "Worse," Robert chuckled. "Someone tried to write a bubble sort for a database yesterday." Megan laughed, her laughter infectious. "You're too kind to them. I would have kicked half of them out already." They talked about work, about how Megan once saved a client server from a DDoS attack, and Robert told them about his startup, which almost became big, but burned out because of a bad manager. The conversation was light, but at some point Megan looked at him more seriously. "Rob, tell me honestly." She put her cup down. What's going on at home? You wrote that everything is complicated. Robert paused, looking at the table. He didn't want to dredge up the past, but with Megan, there was no point in hiding it. Claire wants to go back. She says she made a mistake with this freedom. But I can't. Megan nodded, her gaze calm. I understand. What do you want? I don't know. He looked into her eyes. I used to think I wanted a family, stability. Now all I know is that I don't want to be in a place where I'm being broken. Honestly, Megan smiled. It's already a step. When I was getting divorced, I didn't know what I wanted either. But then I realized that the main thing is to be with people who don't suffocate you. Robert nodded, her words like debugging code, simple but precise. They spent 2 hours in the coffee shop, and when Megan left for another report, Robert felt like he didn't want her to leave Austin. They continued to meet sometimes in a park, sometimes at a bar, sometimes just walking around the city. Megan would talk about her work and how she was tired of moving, and Robert would share stories about students and his past in Silicon Valley. After 2 months of dating, he asked her to stay in Austin. My contract ends in a month, Megan said, sitting on a bench by the river. I was thinking about moving. Austin's not bad. Not bad, Robert grinned. It's the best city in Texas. Only if you're here, she winked, but her voice was serious. Robert looked at her, feeling his heart pounding. Then move. She nodded, and a month later Megan rented an apartment in Austin. They began spending more time together, dinners, movies, going to conferences together. Robert felt like he wasn't just a husband or a father with her, but a person who was seen. 6 months later, during dinner at her apartment, Megan looked at him while holding a glass of wine. Rob, I have to tell you something. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were shining. I'm pregnant. Robert froze, the fork stopped mid-stroke. He expected a shock, but instead felt warmth spreading through his chest. He smiled, that's great, Megan. She laughed, leaning back in her chair. I thought you were going to run away. I'm not one to run away, he took her hand. We'll get through this. They decided to get married. The ceremony was modest at the city hall, with a few Megan and Linda's college friends. Robert insisted on a prenuptial agreement, and Megan agreed without argument. I'm for honesty, she said, signing the papers. No surprises. Robert looked at her standing there in her simple gray dress and felt like he was starting a new life. But the shadow of the past was still with him. He went back into the house to get the last of his things. Claire met him in the living room, her eyes tired. Are you getting married? She asked, looking at the box in his hands. Yes, Robert nodded, putting his books away. With Megan. Claire was silent, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sweater. I'm happy for you, she said finally, but her voice was empty. Robert stood at the window of the new apartment. He and Megan were renting outside Austin. Outside the glass was a neat yard with low trees already touched with autumn yellow. He held his phone in his hands, but the screen remained dark. A few months had passed since his modest wedding with Megan, and her pregnancy was already beginning to show a slightly rounded belly that she stroked with a smile as she cooked dinner. Life with her was simple, honest, but the shadow of the past Claire Andrew, their home was not letting go. Robert sent his son a message about the wedding, hoping for a response, but Andrew remained silent. His last message, accusing Robert of stubbornness, still hung in the chat like a bug he could not fix. Rob, you're staring into space again. Megan walked into the living room, wiping her hands on a towel. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and her eyes had the usual sparkle. Dinner's almost ready. Want to help? Robert turned, forcing a smile. Yes, of course. What should I cut? Onion, if you're not afraid of tears, she winked, returning to the kitchen. He followed her, picked up a knife, and began chopping vegetables. Megan hummed as she stirred the sauce. Their life was quiet dinners, talk of work, plans for the baby. But every time his phone vibrated, Robert hoped to see Andrew's name. You're quiet today, Megan looked at him as she put the frying pan on the stove. Are you thinking about him again? Robert nodded, not looking up from his bow. I wrote to him about the wedding. He didn't answer. Megan sighed, leaning against the counter. He's a grown man, Rob, stubborn like you. Give him time. I gave him time. His voice was quieter than he intended. He didn't even congratulate me. Megan walked over and touched his shoulder. He's angry, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. Just let him figure it out. Robert nodded, but her words didn't ease the heaviness in his chest. He finished chopping the onions and sat down at the table while Megan set the table for dinner. They ate, discussing her new cybersecurity project and his lectures, but thinking about his son kept coming back. A week later, Robert decided to try again. He was sitting in his office at college when Linda dropped by with another stack of papers. "Rob, you're like a ghost again," she frowned, sitting on the edge of the table. "Something with the new wife?" "No, Megan's fine," he smiled, but it was strained. "It's Andrew. He's not answering." Linda shook her head, adjusting her glasses. "Young people. My nephew didn't talk to his father for a year after their divorce either. Then he came back as if nothing had happened. Call him, Rob." Robert nodded, but he wasn't sure. After work, he got into his car and dialed Andrew's number. Long beeps. He was about to hang up when his son answered. "Dad." Andrew's voice was cold, but not angry. "Why are you calling?" Robert gripped the steering wheel, trying to speak calmly. "I wanted to know how you were. I wrote about the wedding." "Yes, I saw it." Andrew paused. "Congratulations, I guess." "Thank you." Robert took a deep breath. "Andrew, I want us to talk. You're my son." "I know." Andrew's voice grew sharper. "But you married some girl who's almost my age. It's weird, Dad." Robert felt the blood rush to his face. "Megan is not a girl. She is smart, honest. And she sees me. And Mom," Andrew raised his voice, "you just threw her out. You made her sign that stupid contract, and now you live with your new wife as if nothing happened." "I didn't throw her out." Robert gritted his teeth. "She wanted freedom. She chose it." "And you chose Megan," Andrew nearly shouted. "And now I'm supposed to pretend that's okay?" Robert fell silent, his fingers shaking on the steering wheel. He wanted to explain, to tell of the pain Claire had caused him, but the words were stuck. "Andrew," he said finally, "I don't want to lose you." "Then why did you ruin everything?" His son's voice wavered. "I don't want to talk, Dad. Not yet." The line went silent. Robert stared at the phone, feeling the emptiness in his chest grow heavier. He started the car and drove home without turning on the radio. Megan greeted him at the apartment with a smile, but then frowned. "Rob, what happened? You're pale." Andrew called. He took off his jacket, throwing it on the couch. "He's angry. He says I ruined everything." Megan sat down next to him, taking his hand. "He's just confused. You're his father, but he's seen your family fall apart. It's not your fault." Robert shook his head, looking at her hand. "I thought he would understand. I thought he would see that Claire had made a choice." "He will see." Megan squeezed his fingers. "But not now." Robert nodded, but her words didn't help. He felt like he had lost his son, and that was worse than losing Claire. The next day, he tried to concentrate on the lecture, but the students noticed his detachment. After class, Linda caught him in the hallway. "Rob, stop being silent." She crossed her arms. "You walk around like the world has collapsed. Tell me." He sighed, leaning against the wall. "Andrew doesn't want to talk to me. He thinks I betrayed Claire." Linda frowned, but her voice was soft. "He's young, Rob. He only sees his side. Give him time, but don't push him." "I'm not pressuring him." Robert shook his head. "I just want him to be a part of my life." "He will be." Linda touched his shoulder. "But now you need to live your life. You have a wife. A child is coming soon. Focus on that." Robert nodded, but Linda's words sounded like empty advice. He returned to his office, opened his laptop, but instead of the code, he wrote Megan. "You're right, he needs time, but it's hard." She replied after a minute. "I know. I'm here, Rob. Always." Robert smiled, but it was a weak smile. He closed his laptop and went home. Megan was cooking dinner, humming some old rock. He looked at her easy movements, and felt that she was his new system, his new code. But Andrew was part of the old, and without him everything seemed incomplete. A week later, Megan convinced him to go out of town for the weekend. They rented a small house by a lake that smelled of pine trees and water. Robert was standing by the shore, watching the sunset, when Megan came up to him, hugging him from behind. "You think about him," she said quietly. "Yes," he nodded without turning around. "I don't want him to hate me." "He doesn't hate you," Megan turned him toward her. "He just doesn't understand. But he's your son. He'll come back." Robert was driving toward downtown Austin. The morning sun was blinding, reflecting off the glass storefronts. Megan, sitting next to him, scrolled through her phone, planning their day. They were going to a furniture store to pick out a crib for their future child. Her pregnancy was already showing, and she and Robert were beginning to prepare for their new life. But his thoughts kept returning to Andrew. It had been 6 months since they had last spoken, and his son was not answering his calls or texts. Robert tried to focus on Megan, on their future, but Andrew's absence was a constant bug in his system. "Rob, you're silent again." Megan looked at him, putting her phone away. "Everything okay?" He nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Yeah, just thinking about the lecture tomorrow. The students failed their tests again." "Yeah, right," she chuckled, but her voice was soft. "You're thinking about Andrew. I can tell." Robert sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "I wrote to him yesterday. Again. Nothing." Megan placed her hand on his knee. "He'll be back, Rob, when he's ready." "I'm not sure it'll ever be ready," he said quietly as he pulled into the parking lot. They got out of the car and Megan took his arm. "Let's focus on the crib. The baby needs a place to sleep, not your worries." Robert smiled. Her directness always had the power to reset. They spent the morning in the store, choosing furniture, arguing over color. Megan wanted white, Robert insisting on a neutral gray. They returned home by lunchtime, tired but satisfied, with the crib ordered and the promise of delivery in a week. Robert was sitting on the couch checking his email when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but it was in Austin's area code. He frowned, but answered. "Robert Mills." The woman's voice was quiet but familiar. "Yes," he straightened up, feeling slightly uneasy. "Who is it?" "This is Laura, Claire's sister," the voice wavered. "Rob, I need to tell you something." Robert froze, his fingers tightening around the phone. Laura rarely called, and her tone didn't bode well. "What's happened?" "Claire." Laura paused, her breathing heavy. "Claire died, Rob, the day before yesterday." The world around him stopped. He could hear Megan talking in the kitchen, the sound of water running in the faucet, but it was all far away. "How?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "The disease," Laura sobbed. "Cancer." She didn't tell anyone, not even me. I only found out, only when it was too late. Robert closed his eyes, feeling the floor slipping away from under his feet. "Why didn't she say that?" "I don't know," Laura sniffed. "She didn't want anyone to know. The funeral's tomorrow. I thought you should be there." "Yes," Robert nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I'll be there." "Where?" Laura gave the funeral home's address and hung up. Robert sat looking at the phone. Megan walked into the living room holding 2 mugs of tea. "Rob, what happened?" She put the mugs on the table, her eyes full of worry. "Claire's dead," he said, his voice empty. "Cancer. The funeral is tomorrow." Megan sat down next to him, her hand resting on his. "Oh, Rob, I'm so sorry." He nodded, but he couldn't speak. Claire, his Claire, the one who had danced at the party at university, who had given birth to his son, who had wanted freedom, she was gone. He felt pain, but not the kind he had expected. It was not a sharp wound, but a heavy, dull emptiness. "I'll go to the funeral," he said finally. "I have to." "Do you want me to go with you?" Megan looked into his eyes. "No," he shook his head. "It's mine." I have to do it myself. She nodded, squeezing his hand. I'm here, if anything. Robert spent the night awake, lying next to Megan. He thought about Claire, about how she had hidden her illness, about how their life had fallen apart. He thought about Andrew, who probably knew but hadn't called. In the morning, he put on a black suit he hadn't worn in years and drove to the funeral home. The room was small, with dark curtains and the smell of flowers. People stood in groups, talking quietly. Robert saw Laura. She was pale. Her eyes were red. She hugged him, her hands shaking. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I didn't know if you'd come." "I had to," Robert nodded, looking around the room. Andrew stood by the coffin, his shoulders tense, his hands in his pockets. He looked older than Robert remembered, but he was still his boy. Robert took a step toward him, but Andrew did not turn. "Andrew," Robert said quietly, stopping a couple of steps away. The son looked up, his gaze cold. "You came," he said, and there was no warmth in his voice. "Yes," Robert swallowed. "I'm sorry, Andrew. I didn't know." Andrew nodded, but said nothing. He turned away, looking at the coffin where Claire lay. Robert wanted to put his hand on his shoulder to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he moved to the wall, keeping his distance. The ceremony was short. Laura spoke of Claire, of her art, of her love of life. Robert listened, but his eyes were fixed on Andrew. His son did not cry, but his face was still like a mask. When it was over, people began to leave. Robert approached Andrew, hoping for a conversation. "Andrew," he began, "let's talk. Please." Andrew looked at him, his eyes empty. "Not now, Dad. I can't." He turned and walked away, leaving Robert alone. Laura touched his hand. "Give him time, Rob. He blames himself. And you." "Me?" Robert frowned. "For what?" "He thinks that if you hadn't broken up, she would have fought," Laura sighed. "He's wrong, but that's how he feels." Robert nodded, feeling the emptiness in his chest become unbearable. He walked out of the room, got into his car, and sat there for a long time, looking at the windshield. He wanted to call Megan, but he didn't. It was his burden. Megan met him at home with dinner, but he barely touched his food. "How did it go?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "Andrew didn't talk to me." Robert looked at her. "He blames me." Megan took his hand. "He lost his mother, Rob. He's in pain. But it's not your fault." "I know," he nodded, but his voice was quiet. "But it doesn't help." He stood up, went to the bedroom, and lay down, looking at the ceiling. Megan lay down next to him, her hand on his chest. He felt her warmth, but his thoughts were far away. Claire was gone, Andrew was gone, and he didn't know how to bring either of them back. Robert pushed the stroller down a path in a park outside Austin, where a gentle breeze rustled the oak trees. Ellie, his and Megan's 3-month-old daughter, slept peacefully, wrapped in a soft blanket. Megan walked beside him, holding a paper cup of coffee, her dark hair blowing in the wind. It had been a year since Claire's funeral, and Robert's life had changed in ways he couldn't imagine. A new apartment, a new marriage, a new baby, all of it was his reality, but the shadow of the past still lay over his heart, like a program he couldn't close. Andrew wasn't answering his messages, and every time Robert saw his name on his phone, he felt a pang of pain. "She sleeps like an angel." Megan peered into the stroller, smiling. "Are you sure you want to push? I can take it." Robert shook his head, his hand gripping the handle of the stroller tightly. "I'm fine. She likes it when I drive." Megan laughed as she sipped her coffee. "You've already become that dad who brags that his child sleeps only with him." "Maybe so," he smiled, but his eyes were thoughtful. Ellie was his joy, a small miracle that he hadn't expected in his 40s. But every time he looked at her, he thought of Andrew, the boy who had once slept in a pram like that and now didn't want to know him. They reached a bench by the pond and Megan sat down, setting her coffee down next to her. Robert parked the stroller, checking to make sure the blanket hadn't slipped off. "You're thinking about him again." Megan looked at him, her voice soft but direct. Robert sat down next to her, looking at the water where the ducks swam lazily in circles. I can't help but think. I wrote to him last week. Send him a photo of Ellie. He didn't even open it. Megan took his hand, her fingers warm. He's still angry, Rob. Losing Claire, it hit him. But he's your son. He'll come back. You keep saying that, Robert turned to her. But what if you don't? Then you've done all you can, she squeezed his hand. You write, you call, you hold the door open. The rest is on him. Robert nodded, but her words didn't lift the weight. He looked at Ellie, her tiny fists clenched in sleep. She was his new beginning, but Andrew was part of the old, and without him, it all felt incomplete. At home, after their walk, Robert put Ellie to bed and sat down at his laptop. He was back to coding, not just for class, but for himself. He was working on a small app for parents to track their kids' schedules, an idea Megan had suggested. Code was his sanctuary, a place where everything made sense. Megan walked into the room holding the phone. Linda called, she said, sitting down on the couch. She asked if you were coming to the department party next week. I don't know. Robert closed his laptop. I'm not really in the mood for parties. Come on, Megan leaned toward him. You need a break, and Linda misses your stories about Silicon Valley. Robert chuckled, but his thoughts were far away. I will think. The next day, he was at college preparing slides for a lecture. Linda popped into the office, as usual, with a mug of coffee. Rob, are you sure you're coming to the party? She leaned against the doorframe. I already told everyone you're a dad with a stroller now. Don't exaggerate, Robert smiled, but his eyes were serious. I'll think about it. Thinking is not an answer, Linda frowned. You walk around like you're carrying half the world on your back. What happened? Robert sighed, pushing his laptop away. Andrew, he doesn't answer. For a year. Linda sat down opposite him, her face softening. Rob, I talked to my nephew when he wasn't talking to his father. It hurts, but he has to come himself. You can't force him. I know, Robert nodded, but that doesn't mean it's easy for me. Nobody said it was easy, Linda shrugged, but you have Megan, Ellie. Focus on them. Andrew will come back when he's ready. Robert nodded, but Linda's words sounded like empty algorithms. He went back to work, but after the lecture he decided to call Andrew. He dialed the number while sitting in his car in the parking lot. Long beeps. No answer. He wrote, Andrew, I'm thinking about you. If you want to talk, I'm here. There was no answer. Robert started the car and drove home. Megan was in the living room, rocking Ellie in her arms. She's fussy today, Megan said, smiling. But as soon as I start singing, she falls asleep. Sing? Robert raised his eyebrows, taking off his jacket. You said you had no tone. Maybe she likes my bad singing. Megan winked as she put Ellie down in her crib. Robert watched them, feeling warmth spread through his chest. Megan was his rock, his new system. She didn't ask him to be anything else, and that was what kept him going. I spoke to Linda, he said, sitting down on the sofa. She insists on the party. Come on, Megan sat down next to him, her hand on his knee. Ellie can stay with the nanny, and we'll have some fun. Robert nodded, but his thoughts turned to Andrew. He wanted his son to see Ellie, to know he had a sister. But Andrew was far away, and Robert didn't know how to reach him. The department party was noisy faculty, graduate students, a few undergrads. Linda greeted them with a big smile, hugging Megan. You finally got out. She handed Robert a beer. Where's the baby? With a nanny, Megan smiled. We decided to have a diaper-free evening. Clever, Linda winked. Rob, tell us about some of your startups. I'm already tired of stories about databases. Robert laughed as he recounted the night he and his team coded for a startup until dawn. Megan listened, adding her own comments, and the evening was easy, almost like old times. But when they got home, Robert checked his phone, no messages from Andrew. The next day, he sat in his office, staring at his laptop screen. The code for the app was almost ready, but he couldn't concentrate. He opened a family chat where Andrew's last message had been over a year ago. Robert wrote, "Andrew, you have a sister, Ellie. She's beautiful. I want you to see her." He sent the message and closed his laptop. Megan walked in holding Ellie. She's smiling. Look, Megan turned her daughter towards him. Robert took Ellie, her tiny fingers squeezing his. He smiled, but his chest was still empty. He wished Andrew were here to see his sister grow up. But his son was far away, and all Robert could do was wait. Robert stood in the kitchen, stirring a sauce for dinner. The aroma of garlic and tomatoes filled his and Megan's small apartment in suburban Austin. Ellie, their 6-month-old daughter, sat in her high chair, waving a plastic spoon and making happy noises. Megan walked in, holding her phone, her dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. "Rob," Linda called, she said, setting the phone down on the counter. "Reminding me about the department meeting tomorrow." Again, Robert grinned, tasting the sauce. She's like an alarm clock that can't be turned off. Megan laughed as she walked up to Ellie and adjusted her bib. "She just wants you to not get stuck in your code, and I support her." Robert nodded, but his smile was weak. It had been a year since Claire's funeral, and life with Megan and Ellie had become his new rhythm. He taught at the college, worked on a parenting app, and helped Megan with her cybersecurity projects. But Andrew, his son, remained a shadow in his life. Robert wrote to him once a month, sending photos of Ellie, but there were no replies. The last time they saw each other was at Claire's funeral, and Andrew had turned away without a word. "Hey," Megan touched his arm, noticing his thoughtfulness. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Robert nodded, turning off the stove. "I wrote to him yesterday. I sent him a video of Ellie laughing. Nothing." Megan sighed, but her voice was soft. "He knows you're here. Maybe he just needs more time." Robert looked at Ellie, who was trying to put a spoon in her mouth. He wanted Andrew to see her, to know he had a sister. But his son was far away, and Robert didn't know how to reach him. The phone on the table vibrated, and Robert jumped. He picked it up, expecting to see a message from Linda or a student. But it was Andrew. His name was on the screen like a system reset. The message read, "Dad, I got your messages. I want to talk. Can I call tomorrow?" Robert paused, rereading the words, his fingers shaking as he showed Megan the phone. "Look," he said, his voice hoarse. Megan read it, and her eyes lit up. "Rob, that's great." He wrote it himself. "Yes," Robert nodded, but there was a strange feeling in his chest, a mixture of hope and fear. "I don't know what he'll say." "Whatever he says, it's a start." Megan hugged him. "Answer him." Robert wrote, "Of course, son. Call when you're ready. I'm here." He sent the message and sat up, looking at Ellie. She smiled, waving her spoon, and Robert felt a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in a year, he had hoped that Andrew might come back. The next day, Robert was at college, but he couldn't concentrate on the lecture. Students asked questions, and he answered automatically, checking his phone every now and then. Linda caught him in the hallway after class. "Rob, you're on edge today." She crossed her arms, squinting. "Is it something good or bad?" Andrew wrote. Robert looked at her, his voice quiet. "He wants to talk." "Really?" Linda smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's great. Don't get worked up. Just talk to him." "I'm trying," he nodded, but there was a lump in his throat. At home, he waited for the call, sitting on the couch with his laptop. Megan was working in the next room, and Ellie was playing on the rug. When the phone rang, Robert almost dropped it. "Andrew," he replied, trying to keep his voice even. "Hi, Dad." His son's voice was calm but tired. I got your messages." Robert clutched the phone, his heart pounding. "Glad you called. How are you?" "It's fine." Andrew paused. "I saw a therapist after my mom." Robert froze. A therapist. Andrew never talked about things like that. "That's good, son. Does it help?" "Yes." Andrew cleared his throat. "I thought a lot. About Mom, about you. I was angry. I thought it was your fault that you broke up, but I know it wasn't just you." Robert closed his eyes, feeling the tension release. "I didn't mean for it to turn out this way, Andrew. I tried." "I know." His son's voice grew quieter. "The therapist helped me see that I blamed you because I didn't know how to cope with her death. But I don't want to lose you either." Robert swallowed, his throat tightening. "You won't lose me. I'm always here. I saw a photo of Ellie." Andrew paused. "She's cute. I want to see her." "Come." Robert smiled, his voice trembling. "Anytime." "Soon," Andrew said. "I have a vacation in a couple of weeks. Maybe I'll come." "I'll be waiting." Robert squeezed the phone. "And Megan, too. She's a good one, Andrew." "I know," Andrew chuckled. I needed time." They talked for another 10 minutes about Andrew's college, his project, how he'd taken up jogging in the mornings. The conversation was cautious but warm, like first steps on thin ice. When Andrew said goodbye, Robert felt the weight in his chest lighten. 10 goes to Megan, who is running away from Ellie. "He called," he said, sitting down next to me. "He wants to come." Megan smiled, her eyes lighting up. "Rob, this is wonderful." "Yeah," he said, picking Ellie up, her warm weight comforting. "He saw a therapist. Said he realized he blamed me." "This is a big step." Megan touched his shoulder. "For both of you." Robert nodded, looking at his daughter. Ellie grabbed his finger, and he smiled. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his life wasn't just a new code, but a system that was starting to work. The following week, he was at college preparing a lecture. Linda dropped by, as usual, with coffee. "Rob, you're glowing," she grinned. "Is that Andrew?" "Yes," he nodded, opening his laptop. "He called yesterday. He wants to come." "I told you," Linda winked. "He's your son. He'll come back." Robert smiled but didn't reply. He went back to the code, feeling the lines on the screen making sense. That evening, he wrote to Andrew. "I'm waiting for you on vacation. Ellie is already crawling. Come, son." The answer came an hour later. "I'll come. I miss you, Dad." Robert read the message and his eyes stung. He put the phone away and walked over to Megan, who was preparing dinner. He hugged her from behind, burying his face in her hair. "He will come," he said quietly. Megan turned, her smile warm. "I knew he would come back." Robert stood at the stove, stirring spaghetti sauce as the scent of basil filled their suburban Austin apartment. It was getting dark outside, and the lights of the neighboring houses glowed softly in the darkness. Ellie, now 7 months old, sat in her high chair, playing with a stuffed animal and making happy noises. Megan sorted papers on the kitchen table, preparing for another cybersecurity conference. Tonight was a special night. Andrew had promised to come, for the first time in 2 years since Claire's funeral. Robert felt his heart pound with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Their phone conversation 2 weeks ago had been warm but cautious, and Robert hadn't known what to expect. "Rob, you're stirring the sauce again like it's your code." Megan looked at him with a smile, putting the papers down. "Relax. He'll be here, and everything will be fine." Robert nodded, turning off the stove. "I know. It's important." Megan stood up and walked towards him, her hand on his shoulder. "You did everything you could. He wanted to come himself. This is his step." "Yes," Robert smiled, but his fingers tightened nervously around his spoon. "Thank you for being with us." She kissed him on the cheek and returned to Ellie, who was trying to put the toy in her mouth. "Hey, baby, don't eat the teddy bear. It's not tasty." Megan laughed, correcting her. Robert looked at them, feeling a warmth in his chest. Megan and Ellie were his new world, his new code, which he had written from scratch. But Andrew was part of the old one, and his return could either complete the system or break it again. The doorbell rang. Robert froze, his heart skipping a beat. He wiped his hands on a towel and went to answer it. Andrew stood there, taller than Robert remembered, with short hair and a backpack slung over his shoulder. His face was serious, but there was a warm spark in his eyes. "Hi, Dad," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. Andrew, Robert stepped forward, wrapping his arms around his son. Andrew responded, his hands gripping his father's shoulders tightly. I'm glad you're here. Me too, Andrew pulled away, smiling. It smells good. Are you cooking? I'm trying, Robert grinned, letting him in. Andrew walked in, dropping his backpack by the door. Megan came out of the kitchen, holding Ellie in her arms. Hi, Andrew, she smiled, her voice warm. This is Ellie. Want to meet her? Andrew looked at his sister and his face softened. She's really cute, he said, coming closer. Can I hold her? Megan handed Ellie to him and Robert watched as his son carefully picked her up. Ellie looked at him with big eyes and giggled, grabbing his finger. She's strong, Andrew laughed, looking at his father. How are you coping? With difficulty, Robert smiled, feeling the tension release. But Megan is a master with children. That's what he says, Megan winked, heading to the table. Let's eat before it gets cold. They sat down to dinner, and for the first time in years, Robert felt like his family, albeit a new, incomplete one, was together. Andrew talked about college, about his project and app for students that he was developing with friends. We made a chat where you can share notes, he said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. But the server crashes if there are more than 100 people online. Sounds like a scaling issue, Robert put down his fork. Want to see your code? Andrew looked at him, and there was a familiar spark in his eyes, the one he had seen when they were building computers together. Seriously, I thought you were just teaching now. I haven't forgotten how to code yet, Robert grinned. Send it to me, we'll figure it out. Megan looked at them, her smile barely noticeable. Here it goes. Two nerds at one table. Ellie, you and I need to stick together. Andrew laughed, and Robert felt a warmth spread through his chest. The conversation was light, but Robert knew they needed to talk about the main thing. After dinner, when Megan had put Ellie to bed, he and Andrew stayed in the kitchen, clearing away the dishes. Andrew, Robert began, putting the plates in the sink. I'm glad you came, but I want to know what's changed. Andrew paused, wiping his hands on a towel. The therapist, he said finally, looking at the table. I started going to him after Mom. I was angry at you, at her, at myself. I thought if you hadn't broken up, she would have fought. Robert nodded, his throat tightening. I thought about that too. But I realized it wasn't your fault. Andrew looked at him. Mom made her choice. You made yours. I shouldn't have blamed you. Robert gripped the edge of the tabletop, feeling the weight lift from his son's words. I didn't want to lose you, Andrew. I called. I know, Andrew nodded, his voice quiet. I just wasn't ready, but now I want to be a part of this. Your life, Ellie. Robert looked at his son, his eyes stinging. You will always be a part of my life. Andrew smiled, and they hugged, tightly, like before. Robert felt the emptiness that had plagued him for 2 years begin to dissolve. The next day, Andrew stayed in Austin. He and Robert sat in the living room, tinkering with his app code. Megan watched, pumping Ellie. It's like you two are back in the 90s, she chuckled, looking at their laptops. Maybe you should take a break? 5 more minutes. Andrew looked up, grinning. Dad found the bug. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Robert winked as he made the edits. Andrew laughed, and Robert felt his son return not completely, but enough to make the system work. They spent the day together, and Andrew promised to come more often. I want to see Ellie grow, he said, standing by the door with his backpack. And maybe we can code together some more? Whenever you want, Robert hugged him. Call me, son. Andrew nodded and left, and Robert returned to the living room. Megan was sitting with Ellie, her eyes shining. You are happy, she said, looking at him. Yes, Robert sat down next to her, taking Ellie in his arms. For the first time in a long time. He looked at his daughter, Megan, and thought about his past, about Claire, about their marriage, about the pain he had carried. He couldn't change what had been, but he accepted it. His life wasn't a perfect program, but it worked because he chose to be true to himself. In the evening, he sat on the balcony, looking at the stars. Megan came out holding 2 glasses of wine. "What are we drinking?" She raised her glass. To us, Robert clinked glasses with her, and to Andrew. They drank, and Robert felt his life, with all its mistakes and triumphs, finally found balance. He took Megan's hand and smiled at the lights of Austin. Tomorrow would be a new day, and he was ready for it. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.